Forgotten truth, the forbidden origins of Islam.
Islam, a civilization that changed the course of history, created empires, and gifted the world invaluable cultural heritage. For billions of people across the globe, its history is clear, its origins indisputable, direct divine revelation. For historical science, however, this period remains an archive that has been extremely difficult to study independently for nearly 14 centuries. At the heart of Islam lies the Quran, its sacred text. In world archives, including the British Library, early Quranic manuscripts are preserved, dating to the first centuries of Islam, such as the fragments from Sana'a. These texts demonstrate orthographic and dialectal differences from the modern canonical Quran. This is a confirmed fact. However, access to the complete corpus of these early manuscripts for independent research remains extremely limited. This raises the question, why such restriction of access to such significant historical sources? Moreover, Mecca, the central place in Islamic tradition, the birthplace of the Prophet, has left virtually no archaeological traces from the time of his life or early Islam of the 7th century. There are no coins, no foundations, no other material evidence confirming its status as a major trading or religious center during that period, only later oral traditions and legends. This is not simply an absence of data. This is the result of large-scale and, according to many experts, irreversible destruction of historical heritage. UNESCO's 2021 report confirms the destruction of more than 300 pre-Islamic and early Islamic sites in Mecca and Medina since 2002. An example is the House of Khadija, the Prophet's first wife, which was demolished in 2015 and replaced with public facilities. Saudi Arabia operates under the 2014 Sacred Places Law. This law, according to Article 12, prohibits the publication of research on the origins of shrines without approval from the Council of Ulama. It also restricts excavations within a 20-kilometer radius of Mecca and Medina to a depth of no more than 1 meter. In practice, this means that 97% of Western archaeologists' applications to work with early Islamic layers have been rejected. This creates a virtually forbidden zone for independent archaeological research. Such restrictions result in a significant portion of potential data remaining unstudied or destroyed. This raises questions about the reasons for such policies. Why is the official version of Islamic history so rigidly protected from external scientific investigation? Our film does not seek to judge or refute faith. Our goal is to examine facts using rigorous methods of historical science. We will ask questions that arise when the official narrative confronts archaeological data and textual analysis. We invite you into this intellectual investigation. Let us begin with the main thing, the Quran that you hold in your hands, that you know, perhaps its history is far more complex than commonly believed.
The Quran, a book without an original.
The earliest complete Quran dates to the 9th century, yet Islam claims the text remained unchanged since the 7th century. Where is the evidence for this remarkable consistency? We face a paradox. The official narrative states that the Quranic text was recorded during the Prophet's lifetime and transmitted unchanged. But archaeological discoveries tell a completely different story. In Yemen, palimpsests from the 7th to 8th centuries have been discovered, ancient manuscripts where text was erased and rewritten. Beneath the upper layer, traces of a different Quran survive. Verses differ from the canonical version, words are missing, and the order of chapters is different. The question arises, if the Quran was recorded immediately and accurately, why do early versions differ so dramatically? Defenders respond, these are merely orthographic variants. But then why erase and rewrite entire pages? Here's an even more troubling fact. There isn't a single complete Quranic manuscript contemporary with Muhammad or the first caliphs. The Prophet died in 632, but the first complete copies only appear after 690 under the Umayyad dynasty. Even the famous Birmingham Folio, presented as evidence of early origin, has disputed dating. Many scholars place it at the end of the 7th century. The picture becomes clearer when we examine the political context. Under Caliph Abd al-Malik, who ruled from 685 to 705, the Quran underwent standardization. This wasn't coincidental. A unified text became an instrument of consolidating power. The 8th century Paris Petar palimpsest shows traces of systematic editing. Earlier versions were possibly adjusted to conform to the new official standard. An uncomfortable question emerges. If the text was preserved through oral tradition, as Islam claims, why did written versions change so drastically? The conclusion is clear. There's no convincing evidence that the modern Quran is identical to 7th century revelations. If the Bible had such textual problems, it would be called forgery. Why are different standards applied to the Quran? But if the sacred book's text is unclear, what do we actually know about the Prophet himself? That's our next chapter.
The Muhammad Enigma: Unraveling Islam's Origins.
At the heart of Islam lies a profound puzzle. Prophet Muhammad, a figure whose spiritual legacy spans 1.4 billion believers worldwide. Yet when we search for hard historical evidence, a curious silence emerges. The 7th century Middle East was a crossroads of civilizations. Persian and Byzantine empires kept meticulous records. Christian chroniclers documented everything from minor bishops to foreign kings. But surprisingly, contemporary non-Islamic sources barely mention Muhammad by name until the late 7th century. Think about this. No coins bearing his name, no inscriptions from his lifetime, no artifacts, no independent contemporary sources confirming his existence. The first solid mention of Muhammad appears only in 691 CE, nearly 60 years after his supposed death, carved into the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. Now you might think, well, the 7th century was a long time ago, records get lost. Fair enough, but here's what makes this truly extraordinary. Meet Musaylima. History calls him the false prophet. He led a revolt in the 620s, the same decade Muhammad was supposedly receiving his revelations. Musaylima's existence is thoroughly documented in early Islamic sources. First-generation Muslim texts confirm his life, his teachings, even his death in battle. So we have detailed records of a false prophet, but virtually nothing contemporary about the founder of one of humanity's greatest faiths. The first full biography of Muhammad, the Sirah by Ibn Ishaq, was written around 750 CE. That's over 120 years after Muhammad's supposed death. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine if George Washington's first biography was written in 1920, based entirely on oral stories passed down through generations. How much of it would you trust? In a pre-digital world, oral transmission meant editing, embellishment, and myth-making were inevitable. Even these late Islamic sources contradict each other on basic facts. These contradictions sparked what scholars call the revisionist school of Islamic studies. John Wansbrough at Oxford, Patricia Crone at Princeton, Michael Cook at Yale. These weren't fringe theorists, they were leading academics at the world's top universities. Their radical proposal? That Islam and the figure of Muhammad might have been constructed later, an ideal prophet created for a new theology rather than a historical person. Gerd Rudiger Puin's groundbreaking work on early Quranic manuscripts revealed something startling: significant textual variations and editing. The Quran we know today wasn't fixed from the beginning. Christoph Luxemburg took this further, analyzing the Quran's language itself. He found Syro-Aramaic elements throughout the text, those famous black-eyed houris promised in paradise. In Aramaic, they might just mean white grapes. This suggests the Quran emerged from a complex, multilingual environment over many decades, not as a single, immediate divine revelation to one man. Now, to be fair, absence of evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence. Scholar Robert Hoyland offers a simpler explanation. 7th century Arabia was an oral culture. Wars, conquests, and time could easily have erased written traces. History has examples of influential figures whose biographies only emerged centuries later from oral traditions. But here's the thing. There's no strong counter-evidence either. We're left in a realm of probabilities, not certainties. Let's put this in perspective with a thought experiment. Traditional accounts say the Quran, 77,000 words of complex Arabic prose, was created over 23 years by Muhammad, who couldn't read or write. The infrastructure? A nomadic Arabian society without libraries, professional scribes, or centralized record-keeping. Now compare this to the Codex Justinianus, Rome's great legal code. 1 million lines of text compiled in just 6 years by a team of 10 professional jurists. Their resources? Constantinople's vast libraries, imperial archives, professional scribes, and 1,600 legal texts accumulated over 4 centuries. Which scenario seems more plausible for producing a complex literary masterpiece? Look, faith doesn't require historical proof. Millions find profound meaning in Islamic teachings regardless of these academic debates. But for historians seeking facts rather than faith, we're left with a remarkable puzzle. The founder of a world religion, whose biography appears only centuries after his supposed death, in sources that contradict each other and show clear signs of later editing. Each person must draw their own conclusions. But one thing is certain, the historical Muhammad remains as mysterious today as he was to those 7th century chroniclers who barely mentioned his name. The Petra theory. Everyone knows Muslims pray toward Mecca, but what if the first mosques were facing the wrong way? Here's the Qibla map of the 8 oldest mosques in Jerusalem, Damascus, and Kufa. Their axes don't point to Mecca, they point to Petra. Why did the mosque in Cairo, built in 642 AD, miss by 15 degrees? Maybe it wasn't a mistake. Look at this contrast. Modern pilgrims circling the Kaaba, while ancient architects built toward a completely different city. Here's a 3D reconstruction of Petra's altar, complete with its own black stone. Did all these 7th century imams really not know where their holy site was? The black stone of the Kaaba, Islam's most sacred relic. But in this desert, there are dozens of identical stones. These are Nabatean betyls, sacred stones from Petra. Notice the identical shape and cult practices. Compare the Kaaba with this Nabatean temple of Dushara. Both are cubes, both contain sacred stones. The resemblance is striking. Here's another puzzle. The Quran never mentions Mecca, only Baka, which sounds remarkably similar to Nabatean place names. What if the first Qibla was simply a repurposed pagan temple? The Quran describes Abraham and the pharaohs in detail, but not a single word about Petra. Or are we missing something? Quran 3:96 states, "The first house of worship was established in Baka." Look at this. Petra has a valley called Baka, with an ancient altar. The linguistic connection is undeniable. But here's the counter-argument. Historian David King, one of the foremost experts on Islamic astronomy, calls the Petra theory amateurish and deeply flawed. In his detailed review, King accuses Dan Gibson of misunderstanding the historical context of early Qibla construction. In the 7th to 9th centuries, there were no precise geographic coordinates, no mathematical trigonometry as we know it today. Early Muslims, King argues, used practical tools, sunrise points, stellar alignments, and local traditions, not compasses or maps. King cites major mosques in Jerusalem, Damascus, and Iraq. Their orientations, he claims, reflect pre-Islamic architectural influence or regional astronomy, not some secret knowledge of Petra. He even goes further, accusing Gibson of, quote, distortion, plagiarism, and ignoring vast Islamic scientific literature, making his conclusions, in King's words, not only inaccurate, but offensive to serious scholars and Muslim communities alike. But if some of King's points sound genuinely convincing, what are we to make of the rest? The Quran calls Mecca the mother of cities, but in the 7th century, it was barren desert. How could it be the center of trade and prophecy? Look at these Roman and Byzantine maps from the 1st to 6th centuries. Mecca doesn't exist. Petra is marked as a key trading hub. Why didn't a single geographer before Islam mention this great city? The logistics are absurd. Islamic tradition claims Muhammad's caravans traveled to Syria through waterless desert. Petra lay on the main trade route. Watch this animation comparing the routes, the sensible Nabatean path versus the Quranic one. Early hadiths contain no topographical details of Mecca, no hills, no valleys, but they perfectly match Petra's landscape. What if the sacred geography was rewritten when Islam moved into Arabia? Cities can be erased from maps, but not from the memory of stones.
Pre-Islamic roots of Islam.
What if everything you thought you knew about Islam's origins was incomplete? What if the world's second largest religion didn't emerge from nothing, but was built upon ancient foundations that existed centuries before Prophet Muhammad? Welcome to a journey through the hidden pre-Islamic roots of Islam. Today we'll explore how many Islamic rituals are, in fact, repurposed pagan cults, and how the complex religious landscape of pre-Islamic Arabia shaped what would become one of the world's major faiths. The academic work of Julius Wellhausen has convincingly demonstrated that ancient Arabian pagan cult practices were preserved within Islam. The circumambulation of the Kaaba, veneration of the Black Stone, the ritual running between the hills of Az-Safa and Al-Marwa, and the festival of Arafat. All these elements are believed to have preceded Islam and were incorporated into it.
From pre-Islamic deity to monotheistic God.
The name Allah wasn't invented by Muhammad. It was already carved in stone across Arabia centuries before Islam existed. The term Allah was already present in pre-Islamic Arabian inscriptions and pantheons. Various pre-Islamic Arabian inscriptions, written in Safaitic, Sabaean, and Paleo-Arabic scripts, serve as crucial sources for understanding the pre-Islamic religious landscape. In pre-Islamic Arabian tradition, Allah was widely considered the father of 3 prominent goddesses: Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. These goddesses were venerated alongside Allah in Mecca. The Quraysh tribe, guardians of the Kaaba, reportedly sang verses invoking Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat as the most exalted female deities. Al-Lat, in particular, was a highly significant pre-Islamic Arabian goddess, venerated throughout the Arabian Peninsula. She was directly called a daughter of Allah, alongside Al-Uzza and Manat. The transformation was strategic. Islam adopted and redefined Allah as the proper name of the one, unique God. This was a calculated move designed not only to unite disparate tribal gods, but also to appeal to existing Jewish and Christian communities familiar with this term. The concept of a supreme God present in pre-Islamic Arabian polytheism provided a ready conceptual bridge, making the transition from a supreme but polytheistically associated deity to the sole, transcendent God of Islam smoother.
Evolution from ancient desert spirits.
Long before Islam spoke of invisible beings made of smokeless fire, the deserts of Arabia were already haunted by shape-shifting spirits that both terrified and fascinated the Bedouin tribes. Jinn are supernatural beings that occupied a significant place in Middle Eastern culture and Arabian mythology long before the advent of Islam. In pre-Islamic times, they were widely regarded as spirits dwelling in deserts and desolate, dark, and filthy places. Julius Wellhausen distinguished them from gods by their mode of worship. Jinn were worshipped privately, while gods received public veneration. Pre-Islamic soothsayers, philosophers, and poets generally believed they received inspiration from jinn. For example, the poet Al-A'sha reportedly received inspiration from his jinn brother, Mishal. But Arabia wasn't a cultural blank slate. Long before Islam, the southern regions of the Arabian Peninsula, particularly the Sabaean and Himyarite kingdoms, developed highly literate, urbanized civilizations with advanced religious and legal systems. Inscriptions from Yemen show complex pantheons, temples, and pilgrimage traditions that predate Islamic practices. The Himyarites, for example, transitioned from polytheism to Judaism in the 4th century, creating one of the earliest known monotheistic states in Arabia. These cultural and religious traditions, centered in cities like Marib and Zafar, deeply influenced the theological and political vocabulary that Islam would later inherit and reshape. The Islamic transformation was profound. With the advent of Islam in the 7th century, existing belief in jinn evolved and became closely intertwined with Islamic teachings. The Quran explicitly mentions jinn several times, defining them as beings created by Allah from smokeless fire. A key change introduced by Islam was attributing moral free will and responsibility to jinn. Unlike angels, jinn bore responsibility for their actions and could choose to be believers, Muslims, or unbelievers, kafirs. This transformation from wild nature spirits into morally responsible beings created by God marked a profound theological shift.
The Satanic Verses incident.
What happened when the Prophet of Islam temporarily acknowledged the very pagan goddesses he came to reject? This is the story Islamic orthodoxy wishes you'd never heard. The incident, known in Western scholarship as the Satanic Verses, and in Muslim tradition as Quranik, describes an alleged event where Prophet Muhammad mistakenly uttered words inspired by Satan, taking them for divine revelation. According to accounts by early biographers and historians such as Ibn Ishaq, At-Tabari, Ibn Sa'd, and Al-Waqidi, Muhammad, driven by a desire to reconcile with the Quraysh who resisted his monotheistic message, was reciting Surah An-Najm, Quran 53. During this recitation, Satan allegedly inserted verses acknowledging the pagan goddesses Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, stating, "These are the exalted Quranik, whose intercession is to be hoped for." The theological implications were enormous. In contemporary Islamic orthodoxy, the historicity of the Satanic Verses incident is largely and decisively rejected, often with the theological consequence of takfir, declaring someone an unbeliever, for those who assert it. The primary theological argument for rejection is the doctrine of Ismat al-Anbiya, innocence or infallibility of prophets. However, some modern Islamic studies scholars accept the incident as historically plausible. The key argument supporting its historicity is the embarrassment factor. It's considered extremely unlikely that early Muslim biographers would fabricate such an unflattering and potentially harmful story about their own prophet if it weren't true.
Continuity and transformation in Islamic rituals.
Every year, millions of Muslims circle the Kaaba in Mecca, kiss the black stone, and run between sacred hills, unknowingly performing rituals that are thousands of years older than Islam itself. The research of Julius Wellhausen emphasizes that ancient Arabian cult practices, including the circumambulation of the Kaaba, kissing of the black stone, ritual running between the hills of Az-Zafar and Al-Marwa, and the festival of Arafat, were not abolished, but rather preserved in Islam. The month of Ramadan reveals striking parallels. Islamic observance of fasting during Ramadan allegedly originates from pre-Islamic lunar cults. Specifically, the Sabians of Haran, who worshipped the lunar deity Sin, observed a monthly fast during the period of the moon's invisibility. During this fast, they abstained from food, drink, speech, and sexual activity during daylight hours, breaking their fast only after nightfall, concluding with a festive meal called al-Fitr upon the moon's reappearance. The striking lexical and ritual correspondence, including the name Ramadan for the fasting period, strongly suggests the transmission of this practice into Islam. Muhammad is believed to have preserved the pre-Islamic conviction that the Kaaba was Allah's dwelling place, re-equating the one true God he proclaimed with the Lord of the Kaaba. This re-sanctification included the physical purification of the Kaaba by destroying the idols within and around it after the conquest of Mecca. So what does all this mean for our understanding of religious origins and the nature of faith itself? The investigation of pre-Islamic roots of Islam reveals a complex picture of continuity and transformation that challenges simplified narratives of complete rupture or direct borrowing. As scholar Carl Becker emphasized, Islam represents a further development and preservation of Christian ancient Hellenism, suggesting that Islam appropriated and reworked old ideas in new ways. This reinterpretation wasn't limited to Arabian sources. The intellectual world of late antiquity, particularly the Alexandrian school and early Arab Christianity, provided a conceptual matrix for Islam's emergence. Greek philosophical theology, biblical exegesis, and Neoplatonic cosmology circulated across Syria, Egypt, and the Levant. Christian Arab tribes such as the Ghassanids and Lakhmids engaged in theological debates about divine unity, revelation, and eschatology, concepts that would later find resonance in Islamic doctrine. Islam's emergence can thus be seen not as an abrupt rupture, but as a profound act of synthesis, drawing from Arabia, Persia, Hellenism, and late antique Christianity. The evidence convincingly demonstrates that Islam did not arise in a historical or cultural vacuum. Instead, it was deeply rooted in and actively built upon the existing religious, cultural, and linguistic landscape of pre-Islamic Arabia. This formative process involved a complex interplay of both conscious appropriation and significant reinterpretation of pre-existing practices and concepts. These elements were adapted and reoriented to fit within Islam's new, strictly monotheistic framework. The truth is clear. Understanding these pre-Islamic foundations offers a richer, more nuanced, and historically grounded understanding of Islam's complex development, one that goes beyond simplified narratives to reveal the dynamic, adaptive, and syncretic nature of religious traditions in their formative periods.